All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, as I've mentioned here before, in a previous life, my first job in journalism was as Pentagon correspondent. And most of the useful insights I got from that job were sussing out how, from an early age, how generals, politicians, and others flagrantly lie while they're in office, and how those lies have profound implications for the lives of our soldiers abroad. But the other side of that job was on what you don't hear about as much, and that is writing stories about our men and women in uniform when they arrive back in the United States, not just while they're deployed abroad. I barely got to scratch the surface while I was in that job, but what I learned about how our veterans are treated in America today horrified me. There are perhaps no better examples than what is going on right now with burn pits, where toxic waste was burned en masse while our troops were deployed, and now the government refuses to compensate and cover care for the many who were injured. It's perhaps one of the most important charges that our government has, to take care of those who fought for us. And all too often, the head of that position, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, is not up to the task. I will not sit and claim that Trump's picks were all that great. The groups that I generally spoke to said that he was relatively above average and that Trump moved the needle in some important ways. But what's going on right now with Joe Biden is actually a scandal, one with major implications for the 17.4 million veterans in the United States, the health care that they deserve, and most importantly, the debt that they are owed. Of course, you've already heard us talk just about how weird Joe Biden's administration picks are. What exactly does Neera Tanden know about the Office of Management and Budget? Susan Rice, a decades-long foreign policy hand at the Domestic Policy Council, and Pete Buttigieg, wherever they can shove him into, whether it's China or Transportation Secretary. But one of the weirdest ones was with big consequences was Biden's decision to nominate former White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough to be Secretary of Veterans Affairs. As we observed here at the time, McDonough is a longtime national security aide. He was the chief of staff to Obama, he's never served in uniform once, and he's never once worked on veterans issues. It's pretty weird by all accounts. And now we know that we're not the only ones who think that. Politico reports that Biden did not consult anyone in the veterans community before appointing McDonough. In fact, Politico reports it was only after the news broke that McDonough was going to take the position that they began calling around to the vets community, asking them to put out statements backing him. Paul Rieckhoff, he's the founder of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, he told Politico, quote, "The veteran community is stunned, and they were not counseled," adding, "I don't know any leading activist who got to weigh in on this pick. I'm getting calls now asking me to support it, but I didn't get it before." Another IAVA executive said, quote, "Dennis McDonough, if confirmed, has an incredibly steep learning curve in front of him." And another veteran activist told military.com, quote, "We were expecting a veteran, maybe a post 9/11 veteran, maybe a woman veteran, maybe a veteran who knows the VA exceptionally well." Well, not off to a good start. And the more we look at it, the worse it actually gets. Stars and Stripes, it quoted numerous different veterans advocacy activists from across the political spectrum who are basically like, who is this guy? In all of their objections, they note two very important things. Number one, Dennis McDonough is not a veteran, which I think matters. Number two, Dennis McDonough has never run a large bureaucracy. And then number three is Dennis McDonough has no experience in healthcare. A lot of people do not know this, but the VA runs the largest healthcare network in the United States. They have 9 million patients. That is why frequently the people who have run that agency have years of administrative healthcare experience, familiarity with veterans issues, and are recipients in many times of those services in the past. McDonough is none of those things, and it's not exactly a time where the VA and their community can use inexperience. We've already had a suicide epidemic among the general population in the United States that has undoubtedly made worse by the coronavirus pandemic. Now, we don't have data yet, but it's probably reasonable to assume, as we see in localized cases, that the vets community, where suicide rate has always been higher than the general population, has already been similarly affected. There's delivery to veterans for vaccines. There's taking care of those who've had coronavirus. There's taking care of those affected by burn pits. Numerous different bureaucratic hurdles that they are going to have to run through. And amid all of these challenges, what exactly is the Biden transition's rationale as to why Dennis McDonough was picked? Well, they say Joe likes the guy. That's it. That's their defense. Joe Biden liked him whenever he was in the White House, and McDonough's lack of experience will be made up by having a direct line of access to the president. And yeah, maybe that's important. It's worth something. But that's not a very good reason, and it's one that we see across Joe Biden's choices. They're all built on personal loyalty, and they have no regard for the skills required to do the job. Personal loyalty is all he really seems to value here, but incompetence is not something. It's so easy to get out of. I mean, take a look at Ben Carson and Wilbur Ross and some of the other political neophytes that Trump put into his cabinet. They were put there because of their good relationship with Trump. Yeah, how did that work out? Not so well. And who exactly were the good cabinet officers that were chosen by Trump? It was people like Steve Mnuchin and Bill Barr, both people with actual experience. Now look, neither were perfect, but they weren't incompetent. We don't yet know what the impact of Biden's choices and thinking are going to be. But one thing I am reasonably certain of is that the things that are absolutely going to fall through the cracks when dealing with a team like this one. And you can say, yeah, but Trump, all you could like. But this here is Joe Biden. His entire case for the presidency is that he knew what he was doing. He was the guy who had been in the room. He was Washington's man. He knew where the light switches were on day one. And so far, we don't see that type of competence. We see a hodgepodge of people who has just been nice to Joe over the years. That's not enough for people who put their lives on the line for this country, and it certainly shouldn't be enough for you or I. And, the vets one, we've been talking about it here, and I did a deep dive, went and tried to talk to the groups, and a lot of them pointed me to these military.com articles and, more, which this is being widely discussed in the vets community, and I wanted to elevate it, where they're just like, who the hell is this guy?
Yeah.
He's never worked on these issues before. And everyone's like, the Biden team is like, yeah, but Joe likes him. That's just not enough.
Right.
When you're running a healthcare agency for 9 million people.
Also, what does it say about you that you've got to get like the personal buddy of Joe in order for the VA secretary to have a direct line to the White House? Like, that person should have a direct line in the White House no matter what. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And this is such a culture in D.C. I mean, you see this over and over again. People are happy to wave the flag. They're happy to do the photo op. They're happy to send our sons and daughters off to fight and die overseas, but they do not ever do what it takes to make them whole again. Take care of them when they come home. The basics of the promise that are made to these men and women. And it's also just like, it's stunning to me, and I shouldn't be surprised, but I actually kind of am, because I knew that this was how Biden world operated. Like, he's got these few people that are around him, that have been around him forever. They're like the only people he trusts. He can't make a decision. It's like all very haphazard and random. It's not like he's known for his competence or his like managerial effectiveness. Quite the contrary, which is part of why the Obama people always had like contempt and condescension for. Remember Obama's quote, never underestimate Biden's ability to F things up, right? I mean, it's kind of what you see with this, because like, look, I didn't think he had that high of a bar to meet in order for this sort of standard issue mainline Democratic Party people to be happy. But they're not basically no one is happy. This has been so random and haphazard. Marcia Fudge is qualified for USDA, but you put her over at HUD. Susan Rice, look, and this is all ideology-free analysis, by the way. Susan Rice, qualified to talk about foreign policy. You put her in a domestic policy position. Jake Sullivan, who actually was foreign policy, restyles himself as domestic policy. You put him back to foreign policy. Dennis McDonough, not a veteran, no experience. You put him at I mean, it's just like all just completely random. And I did not expect the Biden administration to have any sort of ideological coherence, because he does operate in this like, friends and loyalty first manner. But one of the promises, he didn't make a lot of promises on the campaign trail. One of the promises he made was basically like, look, we're going to put the right people in place who have expertise, who are the adults in the room, and are going to just like put the pieces back together and get things back to normal. That is not what this random hodgepodge looks like. And you didn't bother to do the basics of contacting these groups.
It's
before
insulting.
you roll it. I mean, my mind is blown by this politics 101.
And this is another thing where this is a media story. The media woke up in the Trump era to how these agencies matter. They were like, hey, the EPA matters. Who you put in charge of that matters. Who you put in charge of HUD matters. Now they're asleep. I have to read about this in niche military circles. This should be a front page story on the Washington Post. And we all know it would have been under Trump. Every one of us knows that. It would have been talked about on CNN. They would have had had some vets groups be like, headline writes itself, Trump appoints VA secretary without asking vets. Where the hell is the package on that?
And no experience.
CNN. No experience. Everyone would vilify that. Mm-hmm. Now these vets groups are crying into the wind, left out in the cold for nothing. I mean, I'll probably be one of the only people who ever talks about this, and I have absolutely no illusions that this is going to impact anything whatsoever. It takes a large, big conversation in order to change these types of issues and force questions on Capitol Hill and more. It's a disgrace. Yeah. And it's really is a Trump thing, and it shows that Biden is getting away with many of these things scot-free, which have real implications for people's lives. From the DPC with the Domestic Policy Council to the VA, I mean, the very basics of knowing how to run a healthcare hospital system for 9 million people who have been neglected and mistreated for 35 years. That is a scandal, and it's a story. It will get no coverage. Unless there's like Walter Reed level incompetence, it won't ever make the front page.
Yeah.
But it's the little things, just deciding to give somebody, PTSD compensation, deciding to the burn pits, that type of thing, and which we all only know because of Jon Stewart.
Just effective management. Yeah. I mean, when you have so many people who depend on the system, just having it run effectively and people to get the care that they need when they need it without undue delay. And here's the thing, I don't fetishize expertise ultimately because a lot of the experts
experts are bad.
Have gotten us in exactly. We're like, oh great, you're an expert at torture and lying to American people. Congratulations, right? But if you're not going to rely on the merit, I thought this would be the meritocracy thing, the technocrat thing, we're going to put the experts back in charge, and that was what was promised. Now, if you have an ideological agenda and you have things that you want to accomplish and you put someone in place who understands that and is going to be able to actuate that reality, that's a different conversation. But that was never what Biden was going to do, and that's certainly not what he's going to do here with this random ideological grab bag. So any way you sort of turn it, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
That's right.
And even the most reliable Democratic allies possible, even Jim Clyburn, who, we all thought was going to be able to get whatever he wanted basically out of this administration, is left scratching his head about this is not how I thought things were ultimately going to go.
Yeah, well, we're going to find out the consequences real quick.
Next on Rising, got a dream team in the House, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard, and also Democratic strategist Jennifer Holdsworth. They're going to join us for the panel when Rising returns.